To create novel insights by connecting books together, you have to learn to synoptically read. Synoptical reading is a type of reading shared by Mortimer J. Adler in his aptly named book, How to Read a Book. It's by far the most powerful level of reading. It helps you unlock your inner genius by creating novel insights, compounding your knowledge, and becoming that interesting person in your friend group. In this video, I'm gonna teach you how to synoptically read a book. This is the fourth and last part of a 4-part series on how to get the most out of a book masterclass. I strongly encourage you to check out the first 3 parts of this series up above, because synoptical reading integrates all of the other levels of reading into it. Let's get into how to synoptically read. Synoptical reading is the Super Saiyan Goku level of the reading world. It is where you become Mega Brain. Why am I talking like this? Synoptical reading, in short, is done by putting multiple books in conversation with each other to further discussion on a research question. So not literally having them talk to each other, that would be weird, but it means comparing arguments of one book with others to further the research question. And most of the time, this is done on books within a similar topic matter, but you can also do it on books completely outside of a topic matter too. Synoptical reading is by far the most challenging level of reading. This is because it incorporates all the other levels of reading. In order to synoptically read, you have to elementary read, inspectionally read, and analytically read. But unlike an analytical reading where you are the disciple, whereas the author is the master, and you have to work to understand just the author. Synoptical reading, you have to be the master, and all of the other books are disciples, because it is your job to construct a neutral terminology that all of them can work with so that you can further the questions that you're looking into. So you're on the front lines of the reading adventure. And now I'm gonna teach you how to do this incredible reading level, because I have done it many times myself for some incredible effects on my life. The synoptical reading projects I've done in the past have changed me fundamentally as a person. And a couple of those, for example, are my gamification synoptical reading project, where I dove into a ton of different gamification books like Actionable Gamification, Reality is Broken, A Theory of Fun for Game Design. And this synoptical reading project helped me overcome my video game addiction and learn to make my real life the most fun game imaginable. So synoptical reading is an incredible skill, and I want to teach you how to do it right now. There's only 2 stages to synoptical reading. First is preparatory actions, and the second is synoptically reading the bibliography. Preparatory actions involves crafting a preliminary bibliography and then inspectionally reading all of them to get rid of irrelevant ones and add more relevant ones. So firstly, craft a preliminary bibliography. Crafting a preliminary bibliography is gonna be different depending upon the research question that you wanna ask. Once you've defined a clear research question, assess where you are on the inverted reading pyramid. Are you at the bottom, middle, or the top? So in other words, are you a beginner in this topic, an intermediate, or an advanced person? This is gonna inform where you start your research into your research question. So first, I go back through past notes. I check my past book notes to see if there's anything relevant that I've read already on the topic, and I add those books to my bibliography. I ask ChatGPT. I literally say, I'm researching into X topic, give me a list of the most important books I should read on a range of disciplines, right? We don't want just one discipline, we want differentiation. Then I check bibliographies in books and articles that are related to the topic. So in the past books that I read, I'll look at the bibliographies. What other books do they mention? Add those to the bibliography. I will go to book summary websites and I'll look for information relevant. I also will go on online forums and communities that are related to the topic, and I will ask people what are the best books to read in this topic. And then finally, if I'm more in the academic field, I will do some keyword research in academic databases, and I'll get some library catalogs and journals up as well. So the second step to preparatory actions is reviewing the books on your list using inspectional reading. This is important. You do not want to start analytically reading every book in your bibliography right when you make it. That is a recipe for wasting hours of time, because if you're venturing into a new research question, you might not understand the question that well. Inspectionally reading your entire bibliography first is gonna sift through books relevant that you can keep and get rid of irrelevant books. You might even change your research question as a result. You might be like, this is boring, I don't want to do it. So in this way, the two stages of preparatory actions are iterative, because your original bibliography or research question can be changed during the second step. Once you've read your entire bibliography inspectionally, you've gotten rid of irrelevant books, added relevant ones, and maybe changed your research question, that's when you can move on to the second stage of synoptical reading, which is synoptical reading the bibliography. And this stage has 5 steps. Firstly, reading the identified books and looking for relevant passages. Secondly, constructing a neutral terminology. Thirdly, establishing neutral propositions and arguments for all authors. Fourthly, defining the issues. And fifthly, analyzing the discussion. So firstly, read the identified books and look for relevant passages. Remember, in synoptical reading, you're more of the master rather than the disciple of the author. So your job is not to analyze every book in your bibliography. Rather, you are looking for the passages relevant to your inquiry. The reason this step is separated from preparatory reading is it's too difficult to inspectionally read while looking for relevant passages. Also, your inquiry might change from the inspectional reading. So unless you're really advanced in the topic, don't try and mix this step with the last one. That is super important. Secondly, construct a neutral terminology. In analytical reading, we had to come to terms with the author, but it's unlikely all of the authors of the books that you're reading are gonna have terms that work together. So in synoptical reading, it's your job to construct a neutral terminology that allows all of the authors to converse with each other. So for example, in one spree of books that I synoptically read, Stumbling Upon Happiness by Daniel Gilbert, Happy by Darren Brown, The Untethered Soul by Marco A. Singer, Awareness by Anthony DeMello, and The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Compare these books, I had to uncover what their definition of happiness was and align terms, because the terms that they all had for happiness were incredibly different. So only when I align them to my definition of happiness could I start to compare them together. Thirdly, establish neutral propositions and arguments for all authors. Propositions are made of words and terms, and arguments are made up of propositions and sentences. So therefore, they might not be innately comparable between authors, just like the key terms might not be. So it's our job also to establish neutral propositions for all authors, propositions that all the authors can answer. And the best way to do this is by constructing a set of questions that all the authors' propositions and arguments answer in some form. And the question will depend upon your research question, but generally you should create and order your questions in a way in which most of the authors have an answer in some sort. And fourthly, define the issues. This happens once you've created and ordered the most important questions. You should align the different authors' interpretations based off of a pro and a con for each question. So does the author take this side or that side? And these differences in answers are called issues. Sometimes a question is going to have only 2 alternative answers, but in all likelihood, it's going to be much more complicated than that, with some authors saying this, some authors saying that, some authors saying this, and you're going to have a lot more work to do to define the issues among them. And then for the most fun part of all, which is analyzing the discussion. So far, we've identified the relevant passages, constructed a neutral terminology, constructed neutral propositions, questions that the authors have an answer to of some sort, and we've also defined the issues. These steps all apply to the first 2 stages of analytical reading, namely what is the book about as a whole and what is being said in detail and how. The last step of synoptical reading involves skills from the last 2 stages of analytical reading, which is namely, is it true in whole or in part, and what of it? So the 5th step is to analyze the discussion. And this works by ordering the questions that you used to define the issues, from general to particular, and then critically analyzing each author's answer. So you should use the 4 critical analysis questions discussed in the 3rd stage of analytical reading, which were: author is uninformed, the author is misinformed, the author is illogical, and the author's analysis is incomplete. Remember, the goal of this step isn't to come out with a definitive answer to any one of these questions. It's to further discussion in the questions themselves. Often, a synoptical reading quest will be on a topic with thousands of years of history and no easy answers. Something like, what is love? So coming up with a final answer is really hard, and that's why it's essential in this step that you remain dialectically objective. Inevitably, you're gonna allow your own opinion to come through, but the goal is to reduce the chance of that as much as possible. Now, once again, I know that was a lot to take in, and a synoptical reading project is no easy endeavor, but I cannot emphasize enough how powerful it is to learn to synoptically read. This is where you start creating insights that no one else has had. You start learning to connect ideas together across books and come out with just fascinating concepts. You start to be able to intelligently communicate your insights because you've critically analyzed this book and this research question that you've had all of these authors talk about. The synoptical reading projects I've done have changed my life, and I can still talk about all of the research questions that I did inside of them deeply because they affected me so much. So there are 2 stages to synoptical reading. Firstly, crafting a preliminary biography, and secondly, synoptical reading. To craft a preliminary biography, craft an initial bibliography on your research question, and then inspectionally read each of the books on the list to get rid of irrelevant ones and add more relevant ones, or even change your research question. Secondly, synoptically read the bibliography. This involves 5 steps, which is first, reading the identified books and looking for the relevant passages, then constructing a neutral terminology, then constructing neutral propositions and arguments, and questions that the authors can all answer, defining the issues, which is putting those propositions and arguments the author give, and figuring out where do they contrast with each other? What are the different opinions from the authors? And then finally, analyzing the discussion, which involves the last 2 steps of analytical reading. If you stayed through this whole 4-part series, I cannot thank you enough. Congratulations! You are now a master reader. But if you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to sign up for my free email course, Unlock Your Inner Genius with Linked Book Note-Taking. Over 3 days, use linked note-taking apps to create novel insights, compound your knowledge, and become that interesting person in your friend group. This free email course integrates a lot of the stuff that we just learned in this course, so this was an excellent primer for it. If you want to sign up, click the link in the top right corner or in the description below. As always, have a phenomenal rest of your day, eat some peanut butter, and bye-bye.